Well, hey guys, happy Sunday. We are back for part 2 of the weekend skincare Q&A. If you have any skincare questions, hair care questions, nail care questions, dermatologic questions, drop them in the comments section so that when I'm preparing to do the next round of these, I will just go right there and hopefully get to them. Please give your thoughts on daily sunscreen on the armpits. I've recently been slathering the Banana Boat Airless sunscreen on my armpits. Being water resistant, it works well for my mild perspiration. It also has a soft, pleasant scent. Will it be detrimental long-term wise to the lymph nodes? No, that's perfectly safe to do. There's no worry to the lymph nodes. I mean, you have lymph nodes everywhere, so people are under the assumption that the armpit, it makes some sense to be worried about that, I guess, because you have occlusion, enhanced penetration, but there's no evidence really that topical products, including aluminum antiperspirants, necessarily lead to any kind of harmful lymphatic outcome or harm to human health. There's no evidence that sunscreen does that. It makes sense that you have found that to be effective in this area. I mean, the water resistance aspect of it makes it inherently good for cutting down on friction on the skin. It kind of lubricates and provides a nice barrier, and it also cuts down on the accumulation of moisture there, sort of as you suggested. So I think that that's actually a good idea. I typically don't suggest that because people hate sunscreen to begin with, and there's not sun exposure really in that area. Instead, I typically suggest some sort of barrier cream. I'm a big fan actually of the Monostat Chafing Relief Powder Gel because it offers similar benefits that we've highlighted here with regards to the water resistant sunscreen. But that's usually what I recommend people to use, not only under the arms that deal with a lot of chafing and irritation, but also in between the thighs. If you have loose skin after weight loss, I really recommend that as well for cutting down on friction and irritation, because if you have a lot of loose skin in particular, you can end up getting an intertrigo there, skin barrier breakdown, skin breakdown, secondary skin infections, and that actually can cause somebody who previously was not interested at all in loose skin surgery because you're like not bothered cosmetically by the loose skin. Then it becomes like, this is becoming a health problem for me now at this point, and it's becoming more medically necessary to have the surgery. And so, if you could avoid that, I think that's great. Not having to have surgery is what I would choose. Can gadolinium cause skin irritation? Every time I get an MRI with contrast, I get acne the next day. And typically, I rarely ever get acne, maybe some blackheads along my T-zone, but I will reliably have a breakout along my chin after an MRI with contrast fluid. So iodinated contrast, not gadolinium, but iodinated contrast absolutely can cause an acneiform eruption. So not true acne, but an acne mimicker. With acneiform eruptions that can happen with medications, including or contrast, in this case iodine. It doesn't cause blackheads and whiteheads. It's not true acne, but it does cause the inflammatory papules and pustules, kind of like you said, within 24 hours, and sometimes outwards to a couple of days. And in contrast to true acne, which is treated with retinoids and benzoyl peroxide, this is actually treated with topical steroids. It's an adverse cutaneous reaction. It's not commonly encountered. People who have underlying kidney disease are at greater risk, so I don't know if that's you, but they are at greater risk due to probably their slower rates of clearance of contrast. And so that's known as an iododerma. Iodine is acneogenic, I guess you would say. In fact, there's always some concern with people who eat a lot of kelp or dulse, seaweeds, that they might get an acne-like eruption, because those tend to be quite high in iodine, and that's not as commonly encountered as the iodinated contrast issue. Cutaneous adverse events to gadolinium are not super common, estimated to be about 0.1%. Usually, in most cases, it's going to be like urticaria, aka hives, kind of a non-specific rash. As a resident and everything, you learn all about this nephrogenic systemic fibrosis triggered by gadolinium. Very, very rare, okay? So that's like even less common. But most commonly, if you're going to have a cutaneous reaction to gadolinium, it's going to be pretty mild in nature. And for some patients who it appears to be a repeat problem, they may benefit from taking an antihistamine in advance, because a lot of the rash could be mediated by histamine. I broke my ankle 5 weeks ago, and for the past week, I've been experiencing a notable increase in hair fall. Is that trauma related? I'm 67. Probably not. So an increase in hair shedding related to trauma, stressful life event, injury, illness, pregnancy is usually going to appear 3 months after the traumatic event, not 5 weeks. So the timing is not quite right there for a telogen effluvium. It takes about 3 months in order for the shedding to manifest. Now, I will point out we are in the summer months, and there is some noticeable increase in shedding that can happen in the summer. I think I've talked about this in other Q&As that may be related to the longer daylight hours and just somewhat of a disruption in the circadian rhythm. You know, think back 3 months. Did you start or stop a medication? Did you have a stressful life event going on then? Car accident can do it. Significant weight loss can also do it. I don't think it's related to the fall, but I'm sorry you had a fall. I forgot to say that. Breaking one's ankle, that's miserable. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so for some reason, the skin on my breast gets insatiably itchy in the evening and overnight. I wake up with dried blood and nail marks from scratching in my sleep. I had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass in 2021 and do have more excess skin than other areas for some reason. Are there any lanolin-free product recommendations to soothe such a delicate area and or tips to cut down on the itch in such an awkward area? So itch always gets worse at night, always due to the circadian rhythm in our skin. We have more transepidermal water loss. We have more barrier permeability. Itch just gets worse. Plus, cognitively, we're not thinking about as much stuff or as focused on as much stuff. So our mind is free to wander, and that itch becomes more obvious in our mind. And so we scratch. Even when you're asleep, you scratch in your sleep. And scratching is such a maladaptive behavior, but it's very hard to break. I recommend putting Sarna lotion with Pramoxine. They have other Pramoxine itch relief lotions as well. It's not the only one. So just look for a lotion that has Pramoxine. CeraVe makes one, but it's kind of expensive. They make a lotion and a cream. Cream's a little thicker. Put it in the refrigerator and apply it to the skin chilled. The Pramoxine will help calm down the itch, but then the cold temperature will also, by distraction of those little itch nerves, so that can really help. Now, if this is related to sweat and getting overheated at night, that may be also playing a role. Make sure your bedroom is cool. You have your air conditioning going. Keep the thermostat set to a lower temperature to stay cool. Make sure that you are sleeping in really breathable fabrics that are not, causing you to sweat or get overheated or cause friction on the skin. And then if you do have some, I mentioned this earlier, but if you do have some skin redundancy and the folds there trap the moisture, that definitely can make itch significantly worse and irritate the skin quite a bit. I suggest Monostat Chafing Relief Powder Gel to the skin folds. Why does my hair curl and get frizzy in high humidity, and is there anything I can do to prevent this from happening? Oh, let me tell you. I don't even have curly hair per se. I have kind of wavy hair, and my hair just turns super frizzy. Frizzy has to do with the hair kind of taking up the moisture, the water from the air, and it disrupting a bit the bonds, and so the hair shaft swells. And if you have a curlier hair texture, that's going to be more likely for you than other hair textures. You can use a humidity blocking spray. That's what I use, the Garnier Diamond Sleek. These are heat activated, so if you don't heat style your hair, then this wouldn't be an option, but they serve as a heat protectant and a frizz reducer. So they create this heat activated kind of shield that repels water. That's what makes the hair look nice and shiny, smooth and sleek, and significantly cuts down on frizz. Like if I didn't use that today, my hair would be all frizzy. Like I'd have the stand-up frizzies everywhere that you have to tame. I have this special frizz tamer also from Garnier Fructis. They have some great products for my hair specifically. It's like they make stuff that I need. And that Diamond Shine, Diamond Sleek, Diamond Sleek I think it's called. That spray, I swear by. I'm almost finished now with my second bottle of it. It's pretty inexpensive. It's like $7. You also hear people talk a lot about the Color Wow one. That's another option. I've never used that myself. I think it's a lot more expensive. Then in addition to those, you could also try using a bond repair product. I've personally had good success with that popular K18 hair mask. These just help to reapproximate temporarily the bonds in the hair, especially if you have color treated hair with a lot of damage that ends up getting frizzy and humidity. This can help quite a bit, or you've got excessive heat damage on the hair for some reason. They can certainly help. The K18 hair mask is not heat activated. The other ones are. So if you don't want to heat style. Another thing, especially if you have more curly textured hair, kind of layering some leave-in conditioners can also help. They kind of coat the strand and repel that moisture as well. But another pro tip though is to just make sure before you go outside in the humidity that your hair is fully 100% dry, like not the least bit damp. Make sure your hair is completely dry. Could you please discuss the NAC 80 for allergic contact dermatitis? I would love to hear your thoughts and if there are other comprehensive tests available. So this is a standard panel of 80 allergens used in patch testing for allergic contact dermatitis. It tests for fragrances, botanicals, metals like nickel, certain preservatives like the thiazolinones I'm always pointing out, some topical ingredients like certain topical antibiotics, also materials like rubbers, dyes, and adhesives. It's good as like a big overarching kind of screening test. It will identify 70% of patients as accurately having a contact dermatitis, but the exact cause is only identified in 50%. So there are a lot of things when it comes to interpreting patch testing that I won't get into for the purposes of this video, but you have to not just take a positive and call that, you can't just take a positive test and call that diagnostic. It has to be relevant to what the person's coming in contact with. And you can have these kind of non-specific reactions that are more irritation. They're definitely more comprehensive or sophisticated targeted tests. For example, that might be helpful in kind of figuring out, okay, she's reacting to this, that, and the other. She's a hairdresser. So let's do the hairdresser series, which has a lot more specific allergens to that occupation, hairdresser and nail technician. There's also one that's more of an expanded textile. Maybe your contact dermatitis is a textile dermatitis, which usually follows a pretty typical pattern, like where you have contact with your clothing. And then the other thing that ends up being very helpful is directly testing with personal care products. So there are a lot of little ways to really get more data from patch testing. So they have highly specialized patch testing clinics throughout the United States and other countries for sure. In Europe, there's a lot of good contact dermatitis stuff there and here. So you'll have clinics that specialize in that. But if you go to just a general dermatologist, they may just kind of have some of the basic series, and they may not have as readily available some of these more sophisticated ones. They can be, unfortunately, very expensive. Speaking of hairy babies, because last weekend I was cautioning about be careful not to get your minoxidil rubbed off on your child. They might get a little unwanted hair. And so this person says, my daughter has had a patch of skin on the back of one of her thighs. It has always had a surprising amount of hair, even from when she was a tiny baby. Our pediatrician says it's kind of like a hairy birthmark and that it's nothing to worry about, but I've always been really curious about it. Can you explain what causes this? Yes. So hairy birthmarks are actually very common. These are congenital melanocytic nevi. And it's really interesting because what is happening is when you're a developing fetus, everything is getting moved in place. Embryology is fascinating as a side note. I mean, the fact that we even gastrulate is a miracle in and of itself. It's just miraculous. It fully is a miracle, gastrulation and the whole embryology. And so you have populations of cells that arise in certain locations in the early fetal development, and then they have to migrate into where they're supposed to be. And so you can get populations of cells migrating in that have maybe some little genetic glitch to them, and they're, for whatever reason, a little bit too enthusiastic. And that's really what is kind of the main principle behind how these birthmarks or melanocytic nevi form. So they've got, the problem is in the melanocyte as well as in the hair follicle cells. So you get excessive melanin, pigment, they're dark usually, and you get terminal hair growth. It's actually a really reassuring sign that your birthmark is hairy, because that kind of underscores that the tissue there is very healthy. It will respond to hormonal signals. So the hair might become darker when your child goes through puberty. It might get a little coarser. When it comes to these congenital melanocytic nevi, where our ears perk up and where we're a little bit more cautious is depending on the size. So if it's really large, it comes with a bit more of a risk for that nevus, that birthmark, for potentially developing a melanoma. And so we tell patients to really monitor those very carefully. These are, known as giant congenital nevi. They usually cover a pretty large area of the child. And so those are monitored more rigorously for things like growth, pain, lumps, bumps, changes. What is the best order to use sunblock and bug repellents? Often activities require both, and are there any product recommendations that play well with each other? You always want to apply sunscreen first, and ideally you're going to let it fully dry for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then you can apply insect repellent. Why do this separate thing, or should you use combination products? You don't want to use combination products because A, combination products may render some of the ingredients in sunscreen not as effective, and B, sunscreen needs to be reapplied a lot more frequently than insect repellents. If you reapply your combination product that has sunscreen and DEET in it every 2 hours, well, that's going to be a lot of DEET, unnecessary, and potentially even question mark too hazardous there. Although DEET is very, very safe. So I do suggest using different products. Also, good idea to treat your clothing when you're out camping and outdoors for a prolonged period of time with permethrin. If you're going to be in a wooded area with ticks, I do suggest that. I have a video all about bug sprays, so check that out. It's old, but the information remains the same, and so I would check that video out. Also, when it comes to sunscreen, it's not a shield of armor, of course. You want to rein in other sun protective behaviors, which oftentimes will also protect you against bites because you've got, clothing shielding your skin from mosquitoes. Speaking of mosquitoes, they love black fabric, so don't go hiking in a black sweatsuit, okay? Tell me you've never done anything outdoorsy if you show up in a black leggings and a black hoodie to go out camping in the sun. You're going to be hot and sticky, and mosquitoes are going to be coming at you. They love dark fabrics. They hate the bright, bold patterns, the colorful stuff. It's a good way to be festive and keep the mosquitoes away. Well, guys, that wraps up this weekend's skincare Q&A. I hope you guys found this helpful. I really enjoyed doing these, and you guys ask so many great questions, things that I always either want to do a dedicated video on, or maybe there's not quite enough to, but it's really important information. So I'm really enjoying the opportunity to either bring these things up for the first time, or maybe repeat some concepts that kind of get glazed over too quickly in a video, and go maybe a little bit more in depth on some of the questions specifically. So I'm so glad to see that you guys are enjoying these. Thank you so much for all of your comments and questions that you leave here for the Q&As. I really appreciate the engagement. I hope you guys are having a fantastic weekend. If you enjoyed today's video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye!